Hello, my name is Xavier Salas, and I'm going to be refuting the advocate's claim that playing violent video games causes people to conduct a more violent and criminal activity. I will first argue by the following supporting facts. He failed to mention any outside variables that could have contributed to the actions that had taken place, and the evidence he provided was inconsistent and insufficient. Before I begin, I would like to define one term. Asperger's syndrome is similar to autism, but different because the diagnosed has strong verbal language skills, intellectual ability, and the symptoms include a desire for sameness, restricted interest, and difficult with social interactions. The school shootings at Sandy Hook Elementary School and Aurora, Colorado Theater were tragedies, but to claim that their actions were solely caused by this feeling of in control of a video game environment is far-stretched. In a biography on Adam Lanza, the Sandy Hook shooter, provided by biography.com, from a young age was described by classmates as fidgety and deeply troubled. His mother was a longtime gun enthusiast and often brought Adam along with her to the shooting range. Adam also experienced his parents' divorce at the age of 16 and was also diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. Some challenges he experienced was being hypersensitive and experienced with anxiety and depression. Lanza was exposed to guns at a young age, had struggles at home and in social situations, and battled mental illness. These are causes that highly attributed to Lanza's taking aggressive actions towards his classmates. James Holmes, responsible for the theater shootings, attended the University of Colorado in 2011, taking graduate courses in neuroscience, but later dropping out in early 2012. He participated as an intern at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies and was described as having an overall poor performance, being stubborn and uncommunicative. Although he was born into a well-educated family, he also suffered from mental illness at a young age, claiming he could see ghosts and shadows at night. At age 12, he attempted suicide. It can likely be assumed that his inability to create long-term relationships, failure in higher education, and mental illness highly contributed to his violent actions, not his participation or feeling in control in his video games. The examples stated carry heavy emotional weight, but are not enough to create a connection between video games and violent activities. They also fail to establish credibility. In the case of Sandy Hook, a police investigation of the home not only uncovered Lanza's interest in video games, but also several articles and books covering other mass killings. That information was left out. An FBI behaviorist was quoted saying, "The shooter was fascinated with past shootings and researched them thoroughly." The shooters shared many characteristics and behaviors with other active shooters. The advocate also claimed that his mother spoke in an interview about his behavior, but this was impossible as Nancy Lanza was his first victim. Dr. Roger Olson, a clinical child psychiatrist, stated that there is no direct cause and effect relationship between video games and violent behavior, but rather only a risk factor, continuing this by saying that family life has a greater impact. It was the parents' neglect of not wanting to medicate their child and not willingness to face his condition that facilitated his behavior. I failed in finding an article attributing video game violence as a primary source to carry out the violent actions of the shooters. Although most of the shooters did play video games, more similarities were mental health, lack of social communication, and troubles at home. In conclusion, with the lack of support and evidence presented, in addition to essential pre-existing conditions being ignored, there is no clear relationship defined. The participation in violent video games, including first-person shooters, do not significantly contribute to violent activities. Thank you.
All right, well, it sounds like it's a very general response to the proposition as opposed to specific response to the issues that the advocate presented. There's no reference to what the secondary claims are or to what the evidence that the advocate used. Instead, you go right after the two examples of Adam Lanza and James Holmes, and I don't even remember if those were the examples that the advocate used in this particular situation. I think you do a good job diminishing those as examples of how the influences of video games might be contributing to violence. You explain why they don't fit a pattern or there's some other cause that's going on here. Basically, that's the main thrust that you're taking here, is that there are likely to be substantial other causes that are more important than their participation in video games that contributes to their violent actions or their behaviors in these particular incidents and shootings. The FBI profiler also has some information that suggests that sort of thing as well. It was not clear to me when you were responding to one piece of evidence if it was a piece of evidence that the advocate was talking about or it was just a general kind of argument. At the end, like I said, you came back to this notion that the risk is primarily about family issues, about mental illness, about medication, and I thought that those were good arguments, but I'm still not sure if that the advocate's argument that video game violence causes violence in society or something along that line, that's a paraphrase of a paraphrase, was dependent upon those particular examples. And none of your argument is really particularly well organized when it comes to that issue. It's really directed, except for that it's organized by the two cases that you're talking about. And I don't even remember that those are the two cases the advocate talked about. So the application is a little problematic. All right, thank you.